ReCore is an action-adventure game released in 2016 on the Xbox One and PC. ReCore Definitive Edition was a free update that was released in 2017, adding story content, new areas, gameplay changes, and bug fixes. I played the Definitive Edition on my Xbox Series X with its backwards compatibility. This game caught my attention because Keiji Inafune, best known for his work with Capcom on the Mega Man series, is the executive producer for ReCore, working with his studio Concept. Concept collaborated with Studio Armature, who contains Metroid Prime's director Mark Bacchini and several others who worked on the Metroid Prime titles. Inafune and Concept focused on the world building and the more conceptual aspects, while Armature worked on building the game and its mechanics. Because ReCore is a Microsoft exclusive release, these studios were assisted by artists, designers, and engineers from Microsoft Studios, including writer Joseph Staten, best known for his work on Halo and its novel tie-ins. There were a lot of interesting names and teams that had a hand in this game's development, and it's a neat collaboration between Eastern and Western game developers. You can see the inspiration from both in this game. I remember watching the spotlight interviews and announcements for the game at E3. After E3 and after its release, everything went completely silent and I never heard another word about this game. Curious to try it out for myself, I went in without any idea what the game was like, and at first I was pleasantly surprised. ReCore takes place in a future where Earth becomes uninhabitable due to a disease called the Dust Devil Plague. Advancements in space travel resulted in the discovery of a planet called Far Eden many light years away. Humans were sent to Far Eden in cryo-sleep for 200 years, while their accompanying Corebot companions were terraforming Far Eden into a suitable new home for humans. This game's protagonist Jewel wakes up from cryosleep to discover that she's the only human awake, and that Far Eden's Corebots have been corrupted and have become violent. She then sets out with her Corebot Mac to restore power to her ship, find the other humans, and figure out why things haven't gone according to plan while exploring Far Eden. I like Joel's character design. She's a kind and capable protagonist that has experience working with Corebot technology due to her father, Thomas Adam, being the creator of the Corebots, and the two of them helping with the Far Eden project. She's optimistic, but shows worry and doubt. She feels like a grounded character that's a result of her life experiences and hard work. She expresses herself by chatting with her Corebot companions during the story, and during dialogue when completing missions. The premise was grand. Jewel is the only one able to save humanity and figure out what went wrong with the Far Eden project. It was a really cool concept having Jewel brave this new world alone, but with the help of her Corebot companions, who are a product of the humans' tenacity to survive. The game's plot, on the other hand, doesn't contain a lot of moving parts, making it feel simple. Jewel explores Far Eden, learns about Victor, the source of the Corebot corruption, and fights him in order to stop him from ending the human race. Victor aims to rule Far Eden by corrupting Corebots and killing humans. There isn't any complexity to his character, but they do provide some build-up with writings about him, other Corebots speaking his name, and multiple encounters with Victor himself. The game's about 8 hours long, but the simple story and lack of events in the plot made it feel very short. Beyond the main plot, there are audio logs that can be found that flesh out the events that led up to the start of the game and Jewel's relationship with her father. I think spending more time before the events of the game could have provided a better feeling of progression and a better connection to the events of the game. Either adding a short intro sequence or having video logs instead of audio logs that detail the state of the world and the bonds that Jewel had on Earth would provide better connection, weight, and contrast to the events that take place on Far Eden when she's the only human awake. Having a first-hand glimpse into the struggles and relationships Jewel and the human race were facing that led up to the events of the game would paint a better picture and strengthen her in the player's drive to want to rescue the other humans and see to it that they can create a life on Far Eden that everyone is striving for. I didn't know what to expect gameplay-wise from ReCore, and I found a really interesting mix of third-person shooter, exploration and adventure, and even collectathon elements. The main collectibles are the prismatic cores, a power source needed for Jewel's crawler, keys to power doors, and other tools for her survival. Jewel controls extremely well, movement feels tight and responsive. Jewel can double jump and air dash. The air dash can be cancelled, and you have a lot of influence in your aerial drift in order to move and land with more freedom and intention. A landing marker is shown below Jewel when in the air, showing where she'll land. This, combined with the good camera work, greatly improved accuracy during platforming. Jewel can also climb up the side of ledges, so instead of adding frustration by just barely missing a ledge, the game rewards you with precise movement and with generous, consistent movement options. There's a lot of depth in the movement. Minor variations can be made, such as dashing off a ledge, allowing you to keep your jumps and dash once you leave the ground, allowing you to cover more distance. You'll also interact with different environmental objects that allow you to reset your actions while in the air. A few of your Corebot companions give you access to even more mobility and movement options, and allow for some creative and sometimes unintentional platforming opportunities, like an additional jump provided by dismounting the tank frame, and allowing me to skip some intended pathways. ReCore makes an amazing platform game due to its controls. The simplicity of Jewel's moveset, combined with the depth of the micro-movement, environments, and Corebots, made the platforming extremely satisfying and my favorite part of the game. ReCore's world can be broken down into two types of areas and two very different types of gameplay styles. There's a collectathon type open world and the more linear challenge-filled dungeons. Prismatic cores are needed in order to progress through the game, and they can be obtained a number of ways. The cores can be found scattered in the overworld as a reward for platforming to tough to reach areas, and by completing main and side quests. Alternatively, the dungeon areas within the game reward you upon completion, and by fulfilling certain bonus requirements. Far Eden is a large, expansive desert, separated into smaller subsections that are sprinkled with landmarks and points of interest. The strength of a collectathon comes from exploring and climbing interesting landmarks and interacting with the world around you, resulting in a formed connection to it. Just because ReCore's overworld is a desert, doesn't mean it had to feel empty. I think Far Eden suffers from not having enough to engage the player, and most areas fail to leave an impact. There are a few locations that are fun to explore, but most are too spacious, spanning a lot of empty desert with not too much in between. Most areas are too similar to one another and aren't filled with any interesting story events or personality to make them stand out. They tried to add a bit more variety in the new area added in the Definitive Edition update, but all they did was make another desert area, but it's nighttime. There are a few neat exceptions like the digging site, but generally the overworld just has you climb over rocks and debris over and over again, with nothing that really engaged me other than the tight controls. Far Eden takes place on a different planet. That concept alone allows for so much creative freedom, yet there's nothing on it but desert, rock, and a few abandoned buildings that you can't enter. Areas feel big but empty, and until you get the tank Corebot, you can't quickly traverse the world. Even if you wanted to strongly stick to the desert theme, there's still a lot that could be done. For example, you could have stumbled upon a desert oasis that, due to the failed terraforming or Corebot corruption, could contain poisonous water, alien poisonous plant life, and other dangerous elements to deal with. You could find a large canyon that's deep enough to expose darker environments, and could contain a new elemental substance that could be the cause of the corrupted Corebots. These examples would introduce new visual environments, new gameplay elements unique to each area, and tell a story using the environments through the impact and interactions it has with nature and the Corebots. Another big problem with the collectathon aspects are all of the game's mechanics that fight you and de-incentivize exploration. I haven't explained much about the Corebots yet, so let me take some time to do so. Jewel starts with her Corebot mech, but slowly finds new Corebots and new Corebot frames to add to her party that'll give Jewel access to new attacks and abilities. The frame type allows for different abilities, and depending on the type of core you put in each frame, can result in different attacks. The K9 frame can dig in order to uncover key items or scrap used to make new Corebot pieces. A simple ability that I didn't make much use of. The Spider frame can latch onto transport rails, pulling Jewel through the tracks and launching her forward at the end. Latching onto rails is fast and easy. It's used in some fun ways both in dungeons and in combination with the platforming. It was my favorite ability in the game. The Ape Frame can break down specific rocks scattered across Far Eden. This ability is nothing more than a key to open up specific areas, or gain access to items blocked by rocks and other environmental obstacles that only Ape can break. These Corebots, among a couple others that can be unlocked, all provide context-sensitive abilities that do open up the world, but most are pretty restrictive in how specific their uses are. You'd think that this would slowly open up the world and increase your combat potential, but you'd only be half right. Jewel can only bring 2 Corebots with 2 frames with her at a time. This severely cuts the amount of exploration you can do at one time, and as you'll constantly be running back and forth to the crawler and the fast travel points to swap out your Corebot's frames every time you find something that you can't currently interact with. Not to mention certain Corebots are way more useful than others, meaning there are some that you'll want to keep in your party that'll take up your super limited group of only 2 Corebots at a time. I hated this aspect of the game. It seemed to limit the player and discourage their exploration and their combat abilities for seemingly no reason. It feels so bad finding something interesting that you can't immediately open. The game should not force you to backtrack just because you didn't bring the right Corebot with you. I could maybe understand the dungeon areas limiting you to 2 Corebots, because those are less about exploration and more about overcoming linear challenges. But the overworld should absolutely give you access to all 4 Corebots at a time. At the very least, have access to their abilities at all times. 2 of the frames are context sensitive anyways, so they could just lend their support during those context sensitive button presses and then disappear if they're not in the party. This is something that already happens with the Spider Frame. If it's in your party but not the active Corebot, it'll still activate the ability and then swap to that frame. While controlling Jewel for platforming is very satisfying, navigating the larger open worlds can be slow. About halfway through the game, you'll find the Corebot frame Tank. Tank essentially is a vehicle Jewel can ride. It's fast and really fun to drive around in. It even has what I would consider unintentional utility. When you dismount Tank, Jewel jumps in the air. This, however, doesn't count as one of Jewel's 2 available jumps, allowing her to jump a total of 3 times. Despite it seeming unintentional, I really like this tech because it makes the platforming that much deeper and more interesting. Tank solves the slow navigation problem, but it's so useful that you'll always want to keep it, taking up one of your 2 precious Corebot slots. I think a few things could have been done to make traversal before and without Tank faster, such as slightly increasing Jewel's movement speed, being able to hold the dash button longer while on the ground, or being able to slide downhill for more speed similar to games like Nier Automata, or The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild's Shield Surfing. Being able to slide down hills would both improve your movement speed options, and would be an interaction that connects Jewel and the player to the desert environment. Max health upgrades can be found in Far Eden, providing more incremental stat buffs to Jewel herself. More collectibles that can be found are part materials and enemy cores that can be brought back to the crawler, and used to make Jewel's Corebot stronger. I really like these collectibles. Materials are scattered all over Far Eden and scratch that collectathon itch, encouraging you to platform and search every corner of each area. Collecting enemy cores rewards you for combat and directly improves your Corebot's stats. The problem with this is Jewel's inventory for these collectibles are very limited. Jewel's inventory fills up quickly, and once filled you're unable to pick up more material or enemy cores. If you try to collect more, you'll get this awful sound and error telling you can't pick up the item. It's extremely frustrating and unsatisfying exploring the map and collecting things just to have the game arbitrarily tell you that you've collected enough, forcing you to backtrack to a fast travel point or Jewel's crawler, then backtrack to where you were in order to continue collecting scraps and cores. I think this game would have benefited from stronger map design and an option for a mini-map to be displayed on the bottom of the screen, with icons and objective markers on it. There was a lot of time I paused and unpaused the game just to bring up the map and make sure I was heading in the right direction, because the map is a desert and at a glance everything looks the same. The other major component of this game is its dungeons. During Jewel's exploration of Far Eden, vaults will need to be opened using a certain number of prismatic cores as a power source. Once the number of cores has been met, Jewel can take on a more focused linear challenge for both main and side mission dungeons. Progression that's done exploring the overworld leads into progression through the dungeons and vice versa. This provides good pacing and variety when playing through ReCore. Each vault has a blaster level and corebot limitation that needs to be met in order to successfully be completed. Dungeons are linear, but still contain a sprawling level layout. They contain very solid challenges that were satisfying to traverse in and slowly open up. There's a great mix of exploration, light puzzle solving, and combat. These areas also open themselves up to a bit more visual variety. The dungeons take place in caves below the surface, and they'll contain variations of crystals, mechanical structures, and even contain smaller harmless creatures that run along the caves. Because these are smaller spaces, the mechanical structures are explored in a bit more detail, creating some interesting environments. At the end of every dungeon, there's a room containing rewards for the first time completion, and for meeting certain optional requirements. These optional requirements are the same for each dungeon. They ask you to complete the dungeon within a certain time, find a yellow key, and activate a number of switches within the dungeon. While these bonus requirements are pretty basic and not too demanding, they still encourage replaying through dungeons and improving Jewel and the corebots with new corebot blueprints, prismatic cores, and other nice rewards. I love that all dungeons and many areas in the overworld can be fast traveled to from the menus and map, allowing easy access to replay dungeons and an easier time getting around the larger overworld map. ReCore's combat ended up being my least favorite part of the game. There are aspects I like, but there was a lot of clunky systems that held it back. Jewel only has a rifle, so her direct combat is purely ranged. You'll lock onto an enemy with the left trigger once your crosshair hovers over them. You have other tools to make an impact during battle, but your basic blaster shots are not one of them. You also have a limited pool of ammo that drains from a meter. Once it's been depleted, you'll have to wait around for it to charge back up. Using your weak bullets combined with the limited ammo made combat with your basic rifle shots feel useless. A much better use of ammo is in the charge shot attacks. By holding the right bumper for a few seconds, Jewel can fire a charge shot that staggers enemies. Each charge shot color applies unique status effects. Blue has a chance to stun enemies, yellow has a chance to destabilize, and red has a chance to set the target on fire. These status effects did not impact the combat very much. I really enjoyed the color-coded combat mechanics. Cores and enemy corebots come in many different colors. Jewel starts with a white blaster, but eventually unlocks yellow, blue, and red. When Jewel's blaster shots match the enemy corebots, it'll do increased damage. These colors can be changed with a single tap of the D-pad. Your corebots will also assist you in combat, and each frame can be mixed and matched with a different color core for different color affinities and abilities. I enjoyed micromanaging the colors during combat in order to maximize the amount of damage dealt. It kept me engaged with the combat. Eventually, you'll learn up to 4 types of charge shots, each with their own minor uses. Toggling between them is extremely clunky. First, you'll need to make sure you have the color you want selected, then you tap the same color again in order to cycle to the next type of charge shot. The charge shot you selected is not universal either, so when you swap to another color, you'll need to cycle through that color's charge shots as well in order to get the one you want. I like how simple it is to swap colors, but I think there could have been a few ways to improve management of your charge shots. An option to make the charge shot universal between colors would make it so that you aren't selecting and cycling through 4 different types of charge shots for 4 different colors, making it much more manageable. If Jewel's active party was changed to include more than 2 corebots, it would be interesting to see if a weapon wheel could be included to help manage charge shots, corebots, and other abilities. During combat, enemies' health bars will be marked with the threshold. Once their current HP reaches below that threshold, Jewel can perform an extraction. By locking onto an enemy and pressing the right stick, Jewel can start a tug-of-war sequence that has her pulling back on the control stick only when the enemy isn't pulling back from their end. Once Jewel wins the tug-of-war sequence, the core is extracted. Jewel will restore some health, and the enemy is instantly defeated. The extractor is extremely satisfying and fun to pull off. This mechanic has a really engaging control scheme too. In order to tug the extractor rope, it has you pulling back on the control stick. feeling similar to pulling back on the tug-of-war rope. And it's much more satisfying in this context than just pressing or mashing a button. The visual design communicates so much information as the camera lowers to pull the enemy on one side of the camera and Jewel on the other. It gives you a clear view of your progress without any extra UI information. The rope will spark bright red and is accompanied with a loud alert when you need to break between pulls. You get a generous amount of time when pulling at the wrong times, letting you get away with risky pulls, and it always feels fair when the line does break. The entire process can take around 3 to 10 seconds depending on the type of enemy, but the process is always short and simple, never making the mechanic feel tedious and always making it feel rewarding. Upon performing enough damage, instant extracts can be performed that can skip the tug-of-war mechanic and instantly KO an enemy. Since an instant extraction has a short window command, careful and attentive play can result in multiple instant KOs, greatly increasing your damage output during combat. These extracts are supposed to be executable after you've performed enough combo damage on an enemy, but during gameplay it triggered at seemingly random times, making it feel inconsistent. There's an interesting risk when performing an extraction in the middle of combat. Other enemies don't stop moving or wait for you to finish extracting, meaning you'll need to find a safe time to do so. I only wish there was a way to cancel and interrupt the tug-of-war actions early. I love the risk versus reward of attempting a tug-of-war in a group fight. You have the ability to execute an enemy and restore some of Jewel's health, but you're extremely vulnerable to other enemy attacks during the action, and taking damage for attempting a tug-of-war feels really bad. It discourages you from using it until there's only one enemy left, and if the game allowed you to cancel the extractions at any time, like cancel into a dash, then it would allow you to attempt it more often, but it would still require attention of your surroundings in order to react, cancel, and dodge incoming attacks. When performing extractions, the camera fixes itself onto the action, and the control that would adjust the camera now becomes pulling the rope. My only problem with that is during the sequence, you're holding back on the right control stick to pull, and if you take damage it cancels the action, and the camera will jerk straight up as it resets the controls. I learned to play around this, so it never became a huge problem, but if instead they made the left stick the one that pulls, or add a longer delay after canceling the action before the camera resets back to normal, it would cause this to happen less often or not at all. Enemy Corebots vary in frames and core colors just as your companion Corebots do. During encounters with enemies, you'll learn each frame's behaviors, and each frame's color gets a unique attack based on it. I like that once you familiarize yourself with each enemy's frame and color, it directly translates to having the information needed to get the edge in combat. Fighting in large groups can be annoying, with little mobility tools useful for combat outside of your dash, and due to enemies sometimes being outside of the camera, you can get overwhelmed easily. Jewel doesn't have any invincibility frames and can get hit and stun locked to death. Most of my deaths were due to that stun lock. Aside from that, deaths still impact you negatively. Checkpoints are so frequent that if you die you'll respawn immediately before a fight, and no materials, cores, experience, or anything like that is lost after death, making the difficulty non-existent. My problems with the combat are only amplified by the RPG elements included in ReCore. After successful combat and exploration, Jewel's blaster and her Corebots will gain levels and incremental stat bonuses. Throughout the game, the more Corebots Jewel has defeated, the more her blaster levels up. This does nothing mechanically aside from increasing the damage done by the blaster. Once in Jewel's crawler, she can use her workbench to research and build new equipment, swap Corebots into other frames, and upgrade cores, making them stronger. Blueprints must first be researched in order to craft new frame parts. Once the proper materials have been found, Jewel can begin crafting new frame parts for the Corebots to improve their base stats attack, defense, energy, and depending on the type of equipment, and if you have a complete set, bonus attributes can be unlocked. On top of this, each piece of armor is visually different, making the act of customizing and improving my Corebots something that connects me closer to them as companions. This is a clear, tangible reward for finding material and engaging in the game's exploration collectathon elements. Cores that have been extracted from enemy Corebots can be fused with Jewel's cores to greatly increase their base stats and will be the main way of providing growth to your core bots. Just pouring points into each core to make the attack, defense, and energy numbers go up wasn't engaging or impactful. Stats also max out at certain levels, so I didn't feel like this mechanic had any impact on the gameplay itself, or leave any room for player choice. Early combat is pretty engaging. I liked planning around how well I could move and interrupt enemy attacks with the core bot's attacks, swapping cores, and Jules' charge shots. Having the core bot swap command also be an attack was a really cool idea. Swapping can provide you with extra utility by staggering the enemy while switching to a different or more appropriate core bot. The later you get into the game, the more the RPG stats outweigh the choices made during combat and hurt the game's pacing and combat feel. New enemies are introduced the further you get, but nothing that drastically mixes up gameplay. The gameplay falls back on adding higher level enemies rather than new types of interactions. Beyond that, if an enemy is a certain amount of levels above yours, their level is represented with a skull. Skull enemies cannot be damaged by Jewel in any way and must be avoided. This is very frustrating and halts the pace of the game, forcing you to turn around and pursue other objectives when you come across any skull enemies. I assume the idea is that you're being guided away from the more challenging combat, but in the overworld areas those enemies can just be avoided. In all other situations, the only difference in difficulty are the higher numbers. The way you approach fights are still the same. I would have rather the game be restructured in a way that you can tackle those enemies at your own risk, or added new interactions and abilities alongside leveling up Jewel and her core bots, rather than forcing you away. I think the combat is at its strongest when you have abilities that can stun enemies. Linking them together to keep enemies stunned and doing big damage is really satisfying. I think ReCore would have benefited from expanding the combat through adding new interactions with a growing list of abilities, core bots, and core bots' abilities, rather than falling back on RPG level elements, with the combat staying similar but with higher numbers. Jewel has a lot of interesting tools at her disposal. A blaster that can change into 4 different types of colors with 4 different types of charge shots, and core bots with all kinds of movements and abilities. Using these tools, the combat could have slowly grown to include new and unique interactions. I think about the Zelda series and how enemies become vulnerable to different types of items, or the Metroid series, how different types of beams can harm different types of enemies. I feel the same could have easily been done with Jewel's blaster and her core bots. Instead, the combat becomes bloated, as enemies become bullet sponges and deal more damage, creating awkward moments where deaths come faster with a shorter notice, and the movement isn't built very well around the game's combat. If the direction had been focused around gaining new abilities for combat, then they could have focused less on base stats and numbers, and more on reactive engaging gameplay. Adding minor invincibility frames after taking a hit would eliminate those frustrating moments where you get hit once and then stun locked into a death. Currently, there's a limited number of cores you can collect before needing to drop them off at Jewel's Crawler. If those cores could have been lost upon death, it would incentivize players to be more careful and avoid death. It would be a proper punishment for death, while not setting players too far back, as you wouldn't lose any base stats earned, and you can always gather more cores from enemies. It would also reward those who stay alive with faster progression. After reading about the changes made to the Definitive Edition update, I can understand why nobody talked about this game during release. This update included content and quality of life additions that most likely brought this from a negative experience to a neutral one. A new chapter called the Eye of Obsidian adds a new region to Far Eden's overworld and 10 new dungeons. They added the Tank Core Bot, which is currently the fastest way to navigate Far Eden. I can see how Tank being a later addition to ReCore solves one of the most prevalent problems, letting you quickly navigate the overworld. But it adds more stress, making it one of the only 2 core bots you can bring with you at a time. 3 new fast travel nodes were added, and nodes now let players make stash transfers, swap cores, and configure their companion party, things the player used to only be able to do at the Sandcrawler. This is a huge quality of life addition that still doesn't address the changes I'd like to see, but is still an improvement over the original. I still think having no restrictions when it comes to collecting scraps and cores, and designing the game around either always having access to your core bots, or just having access to your Corbot's key abilities at all times would remove any kind of backtracking while exploring. The Definitive Edition added the 3 additional charge shot variations and other small features, fixes, enhancements, and polish. During my playthrough, there were some minor visual glitches, such as icons being stretched into the sky, and very minor gaps between the floor when traversing the overworld. There were 2 major glitches that stopped me from making progress in dungeons. Certain rooms lock you in until all enemies are defeated. In 2 different dungeons, the rooms didn't open after all the enemies were cleared. The first time it happened, the issue was resolved after I quit and reloaded the dungeon. The second time, in the final dungeon, even after multiple resets, the barrier didn't drop. I had to glitch myself over the barrier in order to progress. ReCore's soundtrack was composed by Chad Cedar. The soundtrack contains a focus of orchestra and guitar. A lot of the tracks do a really good job introducing quiet songs that transition into hopeful ballads, drawing parallels with Jewel and her struggle for humanity. These songs are slow and let you sit in the world, letting you feel the emotions put into them. Areas are scattered with enemies, and the overworld themes will transition into combat themes once a combat encounter has been started. I wasn't a big fan when it came to the combat tracks, mostly because these songs repeat constantly. The tracks themselves are loud and intense. The battle theme grabs your attention as it goes from the overworld's focus on raw acoustic strings and melody to an energetic guitar accompanied by strong orchestra strings and horns. Eerie moments are conveyed in the beginning of tracks like Core Foundry and Workers' Revolt, with the haunting strings, piano, and guitar. The soundtrack was solid, however tracks tended to blend into one another. The songs that did stand out did so because of their strong melodies, and how they complement the environment with how long you spend in each one. There were some minor UI elements that I think could have been changed in order to make for a smoother experience. Only one objective description shows in the objective menu at a time, requiring you to change your selected mission each time you want to pursue a different objective. I think it would be helpful for the menu to just contain a list of all objectives, and have them all active at any given time in the menu and on the map. Also, giving the main objective its own unique icon, and displaying all side quests with a different icon on the map alongside it, would allow you to wander toward any quest at any time. Adding a minimap in the bottom corner of the screen, with objectives lined around the edges, would have saved me from pausing the game multiple times for seconds at a time, in order to confirm I was headed to the right direction. Having an option to toggle this map on and off would also allow the game to cater to the player's preferences. Changing your active Corbots is awkward and slow. You'll need to return to Jewel's Crawler or a fast travel point in order to swap Corbots and cores. Swapping cores and Corbots are each in a separate menu, so you need to select both in order to change your crew. I would much rather a sequence where you select your first core, and then a Corbot frame to accompany you with that core, then select a second core, then the second Corbot frame with that core. That would have provided a more streamlined menu to more quickly select your team when you need to swap them out. Some load times, such as loading dungeons, were a little longer than I'd like, but didn't become a problem. Other times, such as fast travel load times, were non-existent. ReCore Definitive Edition was a really interesting mix of genres, but its elements didn't always work well together. Jewel was a great character, but there wasn't a lot of story to make it interesting. ReCore features excellent platforming control, but an overworld that needed to be much more interesting to explore. While I was pleasantly surprised with the collectathon elements of this game, the mechanics make it really hard to immerse yourself in that exploration, forcing you to run back and forth with so many restraints that break the flow of gameplay. The dungeons changed the pace and provided fun challenges with combat, exploration, and light puzzle solving. The extraction mechanic was extremely satisfying and unique, but the rest of the combat fell flat as the RPG elements took over, without providing any more depth to the combat. Jewel has a lot of tools to herself and her Corbots that I would have liked to have seen more directly interact with and expand the combat through the playthrough. There's a lot of improvements that could be made to make this game's experience better overall, and I'm happy to see that they attempted it with its improvements made from the base game to the free Definitive Edition update. I admire the attempts made, but in the end I just had an average time playing ReCore Definitive Edition. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more like it, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. I also stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/RyanBeardy. Follow me on Twitter at RyanBeardy, and I have a Discord with the links below.